Have you ever wondered what's in our blood? What it can tell about our well-being? What about the innovative technology used to unravel the mystery of what's in our blood? Hello, I'm Dean Whiting, and this is It's in Our Blood, the podcast series that explores the critical role technology plays in the pathology laboratory, in hospitals, and in the community setting. Welcome to part 3 of our special podcast edition, where we cover the highlights from the Pathology Technology Disruptors Past and Future panel discussion. In part 2, we looked at what are some of the challenges we're likely to face in healthcare of the future. But in part 3, we turn to some solutions. Enjoy. I'd like to turn to Colin Denver now. Colin, genomic testing has the capability to provide additional diagnostic information, prognostics, predictive screening, and even treatment targeting findings. As a CEO of an Australian innovator in the nucleic acid space, what are the challenges you see in bringing these technologies to market in Australia?
Well, I think it's definitely an emerging space, and I think, what we've experienced, definitely moving into this space, is you can definitely develop the test far in advance of any type of education of what the prescribers or the guideline builders know what to do with it. So I think from a challenge point of view, I think is just because you can build the test, just because it does get approved, is more around how the test should be used, and obviously going then to the clinical utility piece of how can it best, I don't know if it's on actually, how can it best be used to benefit the patient. So, I think our experience in this area has been very positive. I think Australia's got a very good system in identifying technologies that can help. We've got a very progressive group of clinician researchers that are very open to collaborate with companies such as us. I think the one thing that may be a useful example of a regulatory incentive that's been put into place is the breakthrough device pathway through the FDA. So this is basically you submit an application saying that you have something that you believe provides significant clinical benefit to the patients. The FDA will review it and then provide a more, from our experience, a more hands-on approach to allowing you to bring these new and novel devices through. I think the one thing that's missing there is obviously the clinical utility. So obviously you still do your study, but you come out of it with an advanced medical device, but obviously you still need to teach everyone how to use it and where the benefits may lie.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to some of that in a little while. It seems that as an industry, we probably struggle to represent the true value of the products in terms of patient outcomes and in terms of what it means to the healthcare economy. I think we're probably really good at clinical trials, at getting clinical trial data out there. But I think where we probably need to focus a little bit more is what's the real outcome for the patient and what's the real outcome for the healthcare economy. So I guess that's a great opportunity to turn to solutions. And so to summarise so far, we've got an industry which has probably delivered quite significant efficiencies over the last 10 to 15 years. At the same time, the demand for healthcare is likely to increase quite substantially with increasing chronicity of disease. The same, more of everything we've been doing up until now. Is that going to make the difference we need to cope with the likely increasing demand? Those who agree that more of the same will? Okay.
Well, it's got us to where we are now.
What's that, Radin?
It's got us to where we are now.
It's got us to where we are now, yeah. Yeah, so Scott, maybe, who's got the microphone? Can you give the microphone back to Scott for a minute? What do you think, Scott, being right in the field, in the lab at the moment, we're doing more of the same that we're doing now, maybe bigger and better. Will that get us up the curve if we're going to have an exponential growth or a substantial growth, let's say? What do you think?
Short answer to that is no. We've already heard from members of the panel that we've achieved a lot so far through technological advances, and that's both in the testing and the automation space, through IT and through consolidation. But you know, we're well down the pathway of the law of diminishing returns. So we will see some additional advantages, but they're not going to be to the same level as they have been in the past. We do have to look to novel ways of doing things, and technology will play a very important part in that. I think Frank mentioned earlier things like the advances in multiplex testing, new technology, chip technology, the rapid diagnostics in molecular testing and other technologies, and through areas such as point of care testing. You know, it won't just all be laboratory based. We've got to move that testing out. So we've got to look at a whole range of options that are available to us. I think there's more that we can certainly gain through IT, but that changing world is going to require us to change our thinking from a lab perspective. You know, where we do testing, how we do testing, even from a staffing perspective. What's the staffing that we're going to need in our laboratories to manage the new technology? And that sort of change doesn't occur overnight. So we need to look certainly much more radically, look for disruptive technologies.
Yeah. No, that's pretty much the way I think a lot of people see it. And what got us here in the past, maybe a combination of technology and consolidation, probably isn't going to do it in the future. Given the geographic dispersion of Australia, the equity and the access issues, you are going to need probably still to have, how many labs did you say in the countryside? 200? 61 labs in New South Wales. It's hard to see that consolidating down any further, right? So where does the answer come from? The answer comes probably from a range of other things, including the technologies that, you know, our member companies provide. So almost certainly there are some future efficiencies. I mean, I'll ask the audience here, amongst what you're doing now as as member organisations, are you working on? I probably can't answer that. Do you see? I probably can't answer that. Let me ask it a different way. Is there still a role for, in your minds? Is there still a role for further improvements of existing kinds of technology? So hands up if you agree that there's still a role for improvement in the existing kinds of technology. Yes. Yeah. So a majority of people think that there's still a role. So undoubtedly, technology of today, with the improvements that we can bring, will make a difference. But Frank, I've spoken to you about some novel, or you've actually told me about some novel solutions using data analytics that might help us a lot. Do you want to share some of those ideas with us?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I'll try and pick something that's relevant to the general theme today. Fortunately, I've got a very strong research relationship with metabolomics and proteomics team at WeHi, so I have a pool of bioinformatics specialists available to me. What I've done, I've transferred their capability into more general laboratory situations. So the type of things that we've done, we've got real-time quality control running. So I can tell before we release any results if an assay's gone off in real time. One of the other things we've implemented is a very careful analysis of patterns of behaviour within the laboratory. So are we operating at capacity or are we operating below capacity? I can actually measure that. Another idea of analysis of where our work comes from, I've looked at, for every doctor and every clinical unit in the hospital, I can tell you the tests they refer, and if they refer one test, I can tell you the probability that they're also going to refer another test. So I've got very deep data analytics on what they do. Just as an aside there, the most efficient referrers from the point of view of getting abnormal results are the ophthalmologists. Those guys are really good. They hit the ball on the head every time. So we're using that very high informatic capability on more routine lab data and coming up with some interesting things.
Yeah, we'll get to it maybe a little bit of that further on. Mukesh, you've been a proponent of the user as a user of point of care testing in the medical practices you've been involved with. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with those, and has that changed how you manage patients?
Yeah, look, thank you. I mean, I work in an area in the west of Melbourne which is has a more working class demographic and many people from many different backgrounds. So it's the second or first most diverse municipality in Victoria. When I first started in practice, what I was finding was I do some tests and the lab very dutifully sent me the results back, and they'd had them done the week before somewhere else. So that sparked my interest in having a shared record, which I provided for them in written form. I just had a bit of trauma walking past Pitt Street where Nita used to live, and that's where many years ago, and I sort of had a bit of a flashback, so I'm trying to avoid that thought. But there has been some benefit potentially from that sort of process. So we've always empowered the patients in our practice by saying, check your own blood pressures or your own blood test for sugars and stuff like that. So point of care testing was a logical extension of what we were trying to do when we're going around the issues of chronic disease management, because it's an ongoing encouragement of the individual to look after their health and give them a feedback about how they're going for the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it seems reasonable at the time. So from one aspect, the chronic disease management has been very useful. Getting there has been very painful. Still is painful, by the way, 18 months later nearly. But nonetheless, we will help with Melbourne University around chronic kidney disease and early identification and intervention. We can see that the people aren't really been keeping up to date with their keeping to parameters, I guess. Same thing with the diabetes sides of that. And the acute side, there are some new things that we haven't put in place because you've got to have a core set of tests and capacity and ability to be a registered pathology practice before you get accredited practice before we can do the next thing. But we can see things, as Frank was saying, that are coming up and emerging that will make a material difference to the acute setting. An ACR is a bit useful at the moment, but other things like immediate diagnosis of influenza would be fantastic. We've had really sick kids that you wouldn't have known were that sick until they went to hospital. So that sort of thing would be useful. But I think that the cases we're trying to draw up, which would be useful, need to be in the context of our practice, who else is in working with us, and also what is available, and as Frank said, what you're going to do with it if you have got a test that's come back and showing something. And I think that is the crux of it. We can actually get a really good result early, which materially changes the way in which we look after the patient that day. Yeah. And I think that is really why it's becoming very useful for us in our practice. I've actually got one of the few practices with the staff with me. She's the chronic disease management coordinator within a practice. That doesn't happen in general practice generally. So that's how we're integrating our care.
Yeah. No, I think that they're very well made points. Colin, let's turn now to ways in which the technology you're developing can change some of the paradigms about how healthcare is delivered in the future. What are some of the benefits you see coming from genomic nucleic acid-based testing, and could that change the way healthcare is delivered?
Well, it's a good question. Steal that real quick. It's a good question, and I think based on our experience, I mean we're definitely involved in the infectious disease space, and I think you can borrow something from I guess the cancer IVD space as well. And there's been some developments I think that we've been involved in that have already happened within cancer treatment. Looking at companion diagnostics, but I think if you were to try to roll out companion diagnostics in the infectious space, it's impossible. People get treated whether they're going to be tested or not. I think the way that you can look at it is probably something that's just coming through now. Is this concept of complementary diagnostics? So the idea that you've got you're aiding in the risk-benefit decision before a therapeutic option is taken. So in our space, so when you look at STDs or STIs, the options for treatment are getting fewer and fewer, and I guess the need for focused treatment is greater and greater. So having diagnostics that almost act as complementary diagnostics and guide the therapy towards a treatment option that is more likely to be effective is basically where it's at now within STIs, and I think can definitely go into other areas that have similar challenges.
Thank you for listening to this edition of It's in Our Blood. Look out for further topics in this series or go to pathologytechnology.org.au. This podcast is produced by London Agency, Melbourne, Australia.